Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and today's favourite topic, as always, what happens if our builder goes broke? Now, we've covered this topic a couple of times already in the what do we do in order to do our due diligence and make sure that they don't actually happen? How do we manage them all the way through? But in this instance, we're going to be talking to someone who, I guess, at the point where it's too late and receivers or appointers have actually been brought into the process. And so in order to do that, I've got a very special guest today. So Amanda Coneyworth from KPMG, partner in the Turnaround and Restructuring team. Hey, Amanda, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. And I'm really glad to be here, albeit for a topic that people would not like to deal with, but I think it's really important to talk about it and to understand the process. So hopefully I can shed some light from a perspective that you haven't heard before.
Absolutely. And that's, as you said, the perspective hopefully we never have to deal with. I guess as much as people are going to love enjoying and listening to you today, they really don't want to be talking to you, which is a sad thing to say. But that said, why don't you tell me a little bit about, I guess, yourself, the KPM Turnaround and Restructuring team, and I guess your role within that?
Absolutely. So I guess, what does turnaround and restructuring mean? So it's essentially a team, which I'm part of, that deals with businesses that are either in financial stress or financial distress. And so we may be involved with helping businesses to navigate uncertain times and deal with their operational and financial stresses to hopefully make the business into a better shape to continue operating in the future. But where those options or those things that have been attempted aren't successful, we do then take involvement and steps to deal with companies that are insolvent. And that might be through a formal appointment and working with the business in a role that involves acting as an external administrator or a liquidator or a receiver, or working with a business in a more informal sense to work through a process like that. And so I guess what is a registered liquidator, or what is a receiver or liquidator? That's someone like myself, and it's a qualification that you need to obtain through the Australian Securities and Investments Commission. And so I have that registered liquidator license, and that allows me to act and be appointed as either a voluntary administrator, a liquidator, or a receiver, either by a director or a creditor or by the court. So it's a role that not every person can take. My qualifications are in accounting, which is interesting, but the role sort of encompasses much more than accounting. It's more of a legal role or a custodian role, and effectively I'm an officer of the court in that role, and I am required to be independent.
There you go. Sorry, excuse me. Look, we've covered this element, I guess, a little bit on previous episodes, so I don't want to kind of go too deep, but someone like yourself are going to see some really interesting signs that lead up to, I guess, a builder going into either receivership or administration or otherwise. What are some of the warning signs that you tend to see? And then I'll try to add the ones that I tend to see.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to note up front that those warning signs might not be obvious to all parties that deal with a business, particularly when they aren't privy to information and financial information. So if I talk about the things that I would see in my role and through getting access to financial information, there tends to be a slowing down of payments to creditors. There may be some tax debts that have been built up, and certainly we can see through working with the tax office that there are a slowing down of payments by businesses, and the ATO is certainly stepping up their recovery action in terms of making companies either agree payment arrangements or taking steps to appoint a liquidator where they're not working with the tax office. So things that relate to the slowdown of payment of creditors is a really big one for us. But in terms of the more practical things that you might see, particularly when you're interacting with builders and contractors on site, it's really around their presence. It's their speed in terms of getting the work done. You may experience a slowdown in their attendance at site. They may be asking for payment earlier or pushing for payment, and that payment might not align with the progress on site. And another interesting one is where they may issue you an invoice that has a different ABN or a different trading name on it or company name. That's certainly a warning sign we've seen. And particularly with smaller businesses in the construction industry, it's unfortunate, but there is quite a prominence of Phoenix activity where a company may close down quietly, and the business might be transferred to a new entity to continue on, and that means that there are certain creditors within that original entity that have remained unpaid. So it's important to look out for signs like that where you've been asked to pay a different bank account, or there's been a change in payment details or payee details on the invoice.
Yeah, and certainly from my side, some similar symptoms. So I guess no one at the construction site. So whenever there's tumbleweeds, that's a fairly good sign. You should be turning up to site fairly regularly and actually just sharing a coffee with the boys or girls on site, just having a chat with them. They will let you know well and truly whether or not they're actually getting paid on time. Just build relationships and rapport. This is a people game after all, so getting to know people. And the other things that you tend to see are variations that are a little bit extraneous or that sort of thing. And then I guess for builders that are actually proactive, they may actually come to you and actually have the conversation to go, hey, whilst it's a fixed price contract, this has happened. They might actually genuinely just come and have a chat. And that's the best sign when that actually happens. At least then you have an opportunity to work with them.
Absolutely. And I think that's happening more frequently than you would expect. And it's not just with smaller builders, it's with the full spectrum. And I think the importance there is that when they have those conversations with you, and I'm sure you've spoken about this before, it could be that request for more money to preserve the margin on the project and support the builder is ultimately going to be the most cost effective and lower risk option than if you were to walk away and say, no, I can't agree to paying you any extra, because obviously there's a whole load of other costs and risks in terms of having to transition your project to another builder. But equally, I think it's really important, particularly where your builder is working on multiple projects, that you need to be mindful to ask questions about what their plans are and what the status is of their other projects, because it may be that they require the support of all their customers on multiple projects to help to top up those payments and to support their solvency, in order to keep the business continuing. So it's all well and good if you agree to support, but if no one else is, then you're effectively tipping good money after bad. So having that open conversation, understanding what they're doing with the other projects, and hopefully getting some transparency around those dealings, if you can, I think is really important to be mindful of.
Yeah, absolutely. So we chatted to this off air, but it's the opportunity cost. So if they come to you with a variation or a change of price, and you see the signs that they are going to go under, the choice is, well, I've got a legal contract that says you've got a fixed price. You can try to hold them to it, and legally you're right, and morally you're right, but practically it doesn't help if they go under, because you're going to incur holding costs while you find another builder. You're going to almost certainly going to pay more for the new builder coming in, who's picking up the quality and workmanship of someone else and taking on the risk and liability of that. It's going to take time to go out to tender to find people to actually do that. So when you look at the opportunity cost there, sometimes it is better to lose a finger rather than losing an arm, and help the builder out, do him a solid, and hopefully he's still around for the next project. And then that time, maybe the wheels will come around and help you out the next time.
That's a really good point. And I guess in that case, if it did get to that point where you were supporting a builder and they are experiencing that financial distress, there's obviously some things that you can then do to continue to protect yourself in terms of hopefully being able to, you know, agree some sort of payment terms where you've got visibility on where the payments are going to make sure the subcontractors are paid. You are able to monitor the progress and quarantine payments to make sure that they align with the progress of the works. And obviously, they're keeping you up to date on what's going on and whether there's other factors outside that are impacting on their ability to keep going. But that's obviously the best situation to be in and the optimistic situation. So being prepared for things to go wrong is obviously important as well.
Absolutely. So that's what's happening whilst the project's underway. There's also some pre-work due diligence that you could do before you even engage with the builder, noting that it's a point in time. You know, they were good at that point in time. Once the project is underway and the other projects that have got underway, you have, I guess, without paying attention to those warning signs, you don't actually get the visibility of things. And so they could be good at the start and then something trips them up halfway through. So what are some of the things that you see from a due diligence perspective that we should be doing?
Some really simple things include checking that the licenses are in place in each of the states. There's easy registers that you can search. In certain states, particularly New South Wales, the building commissioner has focused on trustworthiness and quality. So in New South Wales, you can even look at an independent rating, which is currently being undertaken by Equifax, which is called an ICERT rating, which is effectively an independent rating for contractors in the construction industry, which effectively goes towards their creditworthiness and trustworthiness. So having that rating is a good sign because they've gone through a credit process where they've had to substantiate their financial position. And you did say that it's at a point in time and historical, but I think that's a good starting point to make sure that at the point of entering into the contract, they're as financially sound as possible. I think some other things.
Can I add one point just to that?
Absolutely.
It's a credit worthiness rating. It's not a quality rating, right? So they might get 5 stars there, but that doesn't mean they're going to do a good job of actually building. Just means they pay their bills on time.
That's a great point. And I think some of the other searches that you can do go towards that quality. Things like e-court litigation searches, make sure that the builder's not involved in any litigation by former customers. I think that's one point to tick off. Seeing if there's any reviews or other intel that you can gather from previous projects that go towards the quality of their work. Having conversations with trades and others that might know that builder, I think that's a really good way to do it as well. But I think all of those things are helpful, but it's really the monitoring and the proactive, attendance on site and making sure that things are going smoothly that will continue to give you the greatest confidence because that's the real-time intel that you're getting.
Yeah, there's also searches on their builder's license. Now, each state deals with this slightly differently, but you can get some good visibility on previous issues, challenges, or defects that were actually issued against their license. Now, a blemish there does not necessarily mean they're a bad builder because there are people who are litigious in nature and put, I guess, frivolous claims through and that sort of thing. What's important is it's a conversation starter. And so you can find something on that. Well, tell me about this blemish that's actually on your record. What happened? How did you resolve it? What was the outcome? Can I talk to the client in the end? Those sorts of things. And sometimes you'll find that, hey, it was frivolous and it was dealt with easily. And other times, hey, it's a massive red flag. But do the due diligence and actually check. So all of that said, Amanda, we've done our pre-checks. We're monitoring along the way. It didn't work. And somebody, for whatever reason, has had to call you in. There's a number of different layers to this with regards to, was this done voluntarily or, hey, has this been forced upon the builder? So let's start with a couple of things like definitions. So I guess there's administration or voluntary administration, then there's receivership, and then there's liquidation, which are the different stages that actually occur. Give us a little bit of an overview just of those three, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. I think let's start with the most positive, which I would say is the voluntary administration process. So that's really designed to help a company that's either insolvent or likely to become insolvent to have some breathing space from its creditors and payment of its creditors while it works through a short process which has the outcome of either preserving the business and allowing it to continue to trade, or otherwise it is closed down or restructured in a way that provides for a better return to the creditors of that company than in the case of a liquidation. So, in terms of how that process starts, most commonly it's the directors that seek to proactively make the appointment, and they do that to protect their own financial position because they do have duties to avoid insolvent trading. So, they make the decision to appoint an external administrator, and that is someone in my role as a registered liquidator that can take that appointment. Now, they make that decision and they approach an administrator, but that administrator still has to remain independent and they must act in the best interests of all creditors. So it's really important that you understand that the role, albeit that it's chosen by the directors, that it is a role where the engaged administrator has to act with the highest ethical standards, and they must have regard to the interests of all creditors and act independently. So it's not a process that's controlled by the directors. The other types of appointments are a little bit different and they have different purposes and outcomes. So if I talk about receivership, that's an interesting one because it's not a process that effectively has an outcome that is definitive. So what happens is if a creditor has security over the assets of a business, and that might be the physical assets, but also the business, the trading business and the value of the business itself, they generally have rights to appoint a receiver where their debt is in default or there's been a breach of their loan terms. And they are able to appoint someone in my capacity as a receiver to the business or to the company. And in that role, I take control of the business like I would in an administration, but I effectively have the primary duty to act in the interests of that secured creditor to realize the assets of the company to repay their debt. So in that case, again, the business may be sold, it may be closed down, and the assets might be liquidated, but generally speaking, there's options there as well for the business to keep trading, and generally it holds its value by continuing to operate and be sold. So two similar styles of appointments where the idea is for the business to keep trading and to increase the value that's available to the creditors. And then we have liquidation.
Can I ask one question on that one? Because there was a subtlety in what you said there that begs for questioning. So you said they have a responsibility to, I guess, the secured creditor. Now, that was I guess, not a plural, that was a singular. So if one creditor is in charge, they only have to concentrate on getting that one creditor paid back. There might be many, many other creditors that they're less concerned about. Is that correct? Or
in effect, yes. Now, the overlay is that the role of a receiver is undertaken through the Corporations Act, and there are certain legal obligations through the Corporations Act that require the receiver, albeit that they have that primary duty to one creditor, that if they're going to deal with the assets of a company, they need to make sure that they obtain market value or the best possible price for the assets of the company when they are seeking to take steps to realize them to pay that secured creditor. And that's designed obviously to protect other creditors and the directors and the ultimate owners of the company, because ultimately, once the receiver has taken those steps to deal with the assets and they have paid the secured creditor back, the company itself then goes back to the director's control. And in a lot of cases, there may be no assets left and still some creditors. So it is a process, again, where there is scrutiny and the receiver needs to be independent in terms of taking steps to realize assets and appropriately dealing with things. They can't go and take control of the business, sell it for $1 to their mate next door and pass that back to the secured creditor and walk away. There are those primary duties in terms of asset sale preservation, but it is a slightly different role, because the reporting and the accountability to all of the creditors of the business isn't necessarily the same standard or level of transparency that would be offered in the case of a voluntary administration, where the administrator is having to report to all creditors and manage a whole range of stakeholders.
So, which then begs the, I guess the obvious question: secured creditor. I guess, how do you secure against a company? Most of us are familiar with, I guess, a normal loan with a mortgage against our home. How do you put a mortgage of sorts against a company?
So that's all to do with the Personal Property Securities Register. So
PPSR.
yes, and I'm sure that's a topic that's been covered or is a topic in itself, but it's certainly important, and different types of loans attach different types of securities to a company. So it might be that if a particular piece of equipment is lent to the company or financed, then that secured creditor might only have the ability to take steps to take possession or appoint a receiver to that specific asset. In other cases, if there is a loan that's provided by either a bank or a non-bank lender that is effectively for funding the business activities, they may have the ability under that loan to take a security over all the assets that are present in the company or after and future acquired assets. And if that's the case, when they do have the ability to appoint a receiver, that receiver has the right then to take control over all aspects of the company and its business.
There you go. So I've heard that the term thrown around, a charge over the company, or a charge over the business. That's the PPSR register. Is that what that is?
That's right. So charges are the old terminology before the 2018 legislation came out that talks about Personal Property Securities Act. So in old land, it used to be called a fixed and floating charge or a fixed charge. Ultimately, it's the same thing in the new terminology.
There you go. Okay. Well, and then the lucky last on the list, liquidation.
Yes. And look, this is probably the thing that is more visible and more common, particularly at the smaller end of the business scale. But liquidation is what it says. So at the point where a liquidator is appointed, and that can happen either by the directors making the voluntary appointment and passing a resolution like they do with an administration, or a creditor can actually take steps through a court process to have a liquidator appointed by the court. When that liquidator gets appointed, and again, they have to be a registered liquidator, the business has got to the point where it's unable to trade and continue on. So if there is a business, it stops trading immediately, and steps are taken by the liquidator to liquidate the assets, convert them to cash, and if there is any cash, distribute it to the creditors of the company. And as part of that role, the liquidator, as an independent party, also has obligations to undertake investigations and report to creditors on the history of the company, what went wrong, whether the directors have undertaken any activities that may be contrary to their duties, whether they've taken money out or transferred assets. And the liquidator needs to report on those investigations to both the creditors and also to the Australian Securities Investments Commission, who keep an eye on repeat offenders and take steps at times to either ban directors from being directors in future instances, or make sure that they're monitoring that activity.
So ideally, we don't want to get to that stage. So
No.
I guess if I do a order of ranking, the voluntary administration is the preferred one. If something actually comes across that way, a receiver means that a secured creditor has said you're not paying, so they come in and take over. So that's the second on the list, and liquidation is it's way too late. But the first two, we can work with them. Yes, we can work with either the VA or the receiver. What are the kinds of things that we could do to, I guess, work with someone to keep the business solvent and keep it working forward? What are the typical things we'd come across there?
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point to make, that the receiver and the administrator really are incentivized to work with the current customers of a business, because a lot of the time the value of the business is in those current contracts and those future contracts. And if there's a chance of preserving the business and selling it, then having good relationships with the current customers is really critical. So they are they're not a scary person, an administrator or a receiver. So being proactive in terms of having a conversation. So if your builder is in administration and you've just found out, making sure that you get in contact with the administrator or receiver straight away is crucial. They will be giving you regular updates on where they're at with the business and what they're planning to do. There may be some temporary ceasing of activities while they understand where projects are at, and they work with the employees of the business to make sure that they understand what it is that's required to keep things profitable. The one thing to remember in terms of the administrator and the receiver is that when they step in, they become personally liable for the business and any
Wow.
debts incurred post that point in time. So they're not going to keep trading a business if they know that it's going to be costing them money and it's going to be loss making. So they'll be making decisions really quickly. They'll be coming proactively to the existing customers, and they'll be saying, we want to work with you to preserve this business, and this is what we need from you. And part of that equation might be that if you owe money to that builder for historical work that's been completed, they might be asking you to pay it, and they also might be asking you in terms of the future work that there needs to be, again, a price increase to cover the extra costs that are associated with continuing to work with you. And I guess if I think about those two things, before handing any money over, I think it's really important to understand your legal rights as a customer. You've got a contract, your builder's insolvent, they're not honoring their contract, they're causing you considerable stress and risk. So it's important not to be bullied into making any rash decisions, and to get the legal advice if you can, or if you feel that you need to, when you're considering the options. But there are certainly ways that you can continue to work with the business when it's under that control. And it should give you the confidence to work with an administrator, because they are an independent party, and same with the receiver. They're an independent party. They've got their personal obligations on the line. So if they are, communicating that they want to continue operating and they're asking you for support, then that should give you the confidence that if you do agree to something, then it's going to, continue to be a successful relationship that at least gets you to the end of your project.
Yeah, the last thing you want to do is throw good money after bad if they are actually going to go under. So how transparent are they in that process?
It's a really interesting question. I think it's not necessarily an easy answer to give. I think the important thing is to keep asking the questions. So in many cases, I've worked with clients of KPMG that are developers, and they've come to me and said, my builders asked for more money. And they've also told me that there's some issues with some of their other projects as well. And so they need us to pay more money for our project to keep it going. And the first question I ask them is, what have they told you about those other projects? Have they given you any evidence that their other customers are also looking to support them? How much information are they sharing with you in terms of the dollars and the cents involved in keeping this project alive? Or are they just giving you very vague answers? Because if they've done their feasibility and they've done their analysis, they should be able to tell you exactly where the extra money is that they're asking you and where it's going to go, and to give you the comfort that if you are putting that extra money in, that it's actually going to pay the employees and the trades that are on your job. And they should be able to disclose information on where they're at with their negotiations with other customers. And if you're an important customer and there are some other important customers in that group, then you should be entitled to talk to each other and to talk together so that you can see where the other customers are at in terms of their willingness to support. And I think if you don't get that information or they're reluctant to share it, that to me is a warning sign. And I've seen the situation where one developer has supported the builder and the others haven't, and then it's ultimately gone into administration down the track, and they're in the same spot, but they've put more money in. So I think that's a good test of the sign of the confidence of their willingness to continue operating if they share as much information as you ask for.
Well, I guess there's the builder sharing it, and then there's the administrator / receiver. So how transparent is the administrator or the receiver?
As I mentioned, the administrator has nothing to lose but their personal financial, liability in terms of continuing to work with a business. So I think they need to be transparent in terms of where they're at with other customers. Ultimately, the success of the sale or the preservation of that business comes down to getting the support of the existing customers. So again, asking for information about where other credit customers are at in terms of their support, requesting evidence, the administrator or the receiver should be providing that information, and they should be transparent. And if they're not, then they need to explain why. But ultimately, again, just like I gave the examples for the builder themselves, they need to be giving you the dollars and cents and the analysis to support the request for more money. And if it's not sufficient, then again, that goes towards less confidence in their knowledge of the outcome. And I guess it goes without saying that depending on the administrator themselves, they are an individual. They may have great experience in terms of acting for builders and have been through the process time and time again. But there may be other administrators that aren't necessarily as exposed to the scenario. So you've got to remember these are people. They're coming in, and as I said, my background is a chartered accountant, and I'm in there operating a business in a technical industry. So make sure that you ask the questions, and if they don't answer them sufficiently, then again, that's a warning sign or just something to keep in mind when you're making the decision.
Yeah, absolutely. As is developers, we all have to do deal number one. The liquidators have to do liquidation number one. So it doesn't mean that they've got the runs on the board yet. But we all have to do it. All have to go through the journey. So what actions can I take to protect myself and my project?
I think there's a few things. It's really making sure that in that pre-stage, before an administrator or an external liquidator is appointed, just making sure that you've got that constant visibility over the progress of the build, making sure that if you're being asked to make payment, that you're very clear that the payment aligns with the progress on site, and not being afraid to question the status of the works and hold back payment if you're concerned that the works haven't been completed. And then I think as you're getting towards the end of the project, ultimately builders where they're experiencing that distress may be pushing you to wrap up the payments quickly, or to give you to sign off on the work so that they can move on to another project. Again, don't be afraid to hold back on that. I'm actually dealing with a builder now on one of my receivership sites, and they gave me a whole lot of grief in terms of moving on to another project and getting sign off for their insurance. And, the pain of having to deal with those final defects or those final little things really sort of came down to me holding back payment and holding back signing off on the completion of the works to get them to continue to be on site in a proactive manner. You start losing their interest and it becomes a lot harder. So I think they're the things that you can do to make sure that you're getting the result and getting your build across the line and aligning payments. And then I guess in terms of working with a insolvency practitioner, if your builder does go insolvent, it's really being able to ask those questions and understanding where you're at with your project. Is it going to be economical and efficient to continue working with the administrator, understanding what that extra payment, if they're asking for more, looks like in terms of your own feasibility, and what's tied into working with them in terms of the certifications on your site and the documentation and the ability to actually get an outcome without the pain of dealing with transitioning your project to a new builder. Is it worth it to continue working with the administrator, asking those questions, making sure that you're getting the information and getting the confidence that it's a good idea to keep working with them.
Yeah. Now, for me personally, one of the things that I like to do is special condition on the contract that says, well, before any payment claim is actually made, I need to see demonstration that the appropriate certification has been signed off, that the quality of the work has actually been done. Now, typically, you're going to find that you won't get the sign off unless the tradie has been paid, because the tradie is the one who's going to get the sign off to come through. So that's a really good sign to say whether or not the cash is actually making it all the way through to the end. So plus, on the worst case scenario that I guess someone like yourself gets involved, Amanda, you've got all the sign offs. So any new builder that comes in knows at least, I guess, the quality of the work that they're actually taking on, as opposed to having to chase subbies that don't want to give the sign off and may never give the sign off, and potentially a whole bunch of rework.
That's a really good point. And it kind of then opens up the can of worms in terms of subcontractors and their solvency. So it could be that your builder is more than capable, but they have an exposure to a subcontractor that is experiencing financial distress. So again, the same criteria applies, making sure that you understand who your builder's contracting with, monitoring the progress of the works for particular trades, and to the extent that there are payments that are being passed through, are they going to the party that's going to finish the works, and what's the status of their financial position. I think the only way to really get into the detail of that is to be present on site, to make sure that you're engaging with the sub trades and understanding where they're at with their works, and making sure that there's no lag in terms of time frame and execution on what they've been asked to do. Otherwise, it becomes uncontrollable if you don't have that visibility on the site.
Yeah. The other thing is when a claim is made, well, I'm not a builder. I can't tell, did they use 100 cubic meters of concrete or 200 cubic meters of concrete? So having someone like a quantity surveyor come in and actually go, well, bill of quantities, you got invoiced for X amount actually got installed. That is something that you should absolutely engage in along the way. And the different stages, is it 20% complete? Is it 30% complete? I can look at it and make I think it's that. But the QS is actually going to have a lot more science to it.
Absolutely. And it's not a huge cost in the scheme of things, particularly for projects that are in the six figures, that, you can get these reports done very quickly and efficiently. And in particular, where things aren't necessarily going to plan on site and the builder is able to progress other trade works and get other things done, it might be that your progress claims don't align with the works that are completed on site. So having that QS to actually go through and assess the overall completion and align that to the proposed payments is also really helpful, where you aren't necessarily following the timeframes and the progress payments within the contract.
Yeah. The other thing is, a lot of, as your projects start to get larger in size, a lot of your financiers are actually going to mandate a quantity surveyor is actually involved in the process anyway. So knowing that that's going to happen, even on the smaller projects, you've got nothing to lose to actually start to get familiar with that process and use it to your advantage. Your QS can also be used at the start of the process before you sign the builder's contract to make sure the builder's contract is actually appropriate and financially viable in the first place, right? So even before the contract's signed, you can have your QS help you out.
Absolutely. And the QS is probably a good test of the competency of the builder. They may have dealt with them previously. And so, again, they're a good source of information in terms of having worked with them before. Had they encountered any difficulties on previous progress claims, and what might be the warning signs there? So another angle of information, and a really good point around lenders and requiring that support in terms of advancing funds to a project, particularly where there's drawdowns of a loan. I think having the practice of having a QS and the processes in place, the builder will understand where they sit as well. They'll know that they have to do a good job of doing the works, and they can't just lob in a progress claim without having thought about what's been completed on site. So you're really setting the bar high where you get those third parties involved to help you to make sure that you're across the detail.
Yep. I think we've kind of wrapped it up. Is there anything that I've missed in all of this? Is there any other learnings or lessons that we can throw out there, tidbits for our clients?
I was just going to say, I think it's a topic that feels like doom and gloom, but I think more and more so, it's really important in the building and construction industry to be aware of those warning signs, to understand that builders and trades aren't looking to go insolvent, but certainly they're dealing with changes to situations on a daily basis and battling those increases to input costs and changes in their own lenders and stakeholders and demands on their business. So I think just making sure that you're aware that it's not a point in time situation that you need to monitor. It's just keeping your ear to the ground and having those ongoing transparent discussions and really being present at your site that's going to give you the greater chance of minimizing that risk, and utilizing all of those media searches and free license checks and ratings tools to your disposal, spending sometimes some small dollars to get those credit reports upfront can avoid a world of pain, and really sort of making sure that your contracts are really clear and thought out, and you're getting that adequate information from the builder to give you that confidence upfront, I think is some really good ways to reduce the risk. And obviously then, if you are having to deal with an administrator, whether it's a liquidator or administrator or receiver, if you don't understand the process or they're not giving you the information, then making sure that you go and ask someone else that's qualified in that space, or seeking some advice from professional bodies, whether that's ASIC or the ARETA, which is the professional body that governs the registered liquidators. So I think there's a lot of information out there. You don't need to be alone, and it's certainly valuable to seek support if you're not getting the answers that you need to keep your project alive.
Absolutely. But prevention, folks, is always better than cure. And in order to do that, make sure you've got, I guess, huge amounts of visibility and more importantly, a really good relationship with your builder. I cannot stress that enough. Be talking to them regularly, be talking to the tradies regularly, get to know them really, really well. And if it does get to the point where someone like Amanda is involved, then get to know your liquidator or your administrator just as well, because those relationships are the things that are going to give you A, visibility, B, clarity, and C, the ability to trade through if there is actually an opportunity. So anything else you want to add to that, Amanda?
No, I think we've covered a great deal of topics, so hopefully it's been helpful.
All good. Well, thank you very much for that. If you want to hear from industry experts just like Amanda, we run those at meetups all the way around the country, folks. So we run these events in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. You can turn up physically, and you can also live stream them from no matter where you are, anywhere. So we would love to see you at one of our upcoming meetups. And Amanda, we'll try to get you at one of our ones. You're Sydney based, so we'll try to get you in there as soon as we can, lickety split.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Rob.
No worries. Thank you, Amanda. Really appreciate your time. And till then, folks, we'll see you at the next one. Bye for now.